Ladies and gentlemen, the cold weather is coming, and on top of that, a lot of the places we would buy vintage tools, flea markets, garage sales, estate sales, that stuff's just closed right now. So if we want to find good old tools, it is off to the internet. And that's sketchy, because that means buying tools from pictures, buying tools you can't hold in your hand, paying shipping, taking a chance the stuff's actually going to be what the seller says it's going to be. So if we're going to buy vintage tools from eBay and other auction sites, we need stuff that's going to be light and easy to ship, things that are mechanically simple, so not a lot can go wrong, and stuff that's going to offer us a lot of value for our money. Luckily, I've got just the thing. First things first, if you are a new woodworker and you just want to get going, I recommend you pick up a set of these Narex True Imperial chisels, or obviously metric if you're in a metric shop. I've had this set for about 4 years. They've been stout, robustly constructed. I've never had to fix one. Good all-around bench chisel. And you know, tool shopping, tool buying has changed a ton in the last 10 years. When I first got started, you pretty much had to find and restore some vintage tools. The affordable offerings from new tool companies were not great. And that's changed. These days, affordable tools have gotten, well, some of them have gotten excellent. I'm sure I have some viewers who don't own a single vintage tool. They buy everything new off the internet and they're still doing fine. That's great. But I'll be honest, chisels are different. Vintage chisels, look, you don't hear me say this too often, but vintage chisels really are better, especially where the affordable ones are concerned. You can buy super expensive new chisels today that are amazing, but they're also super expensive. Vintage chisels offer you a true opportunity to get amazing quality at an affordable price. So it's off to eBay to find the good stuff, but whew, it is a jungle out there. So before we start looking at auctions, let's sort through all the different chisels you might see, figure out what we're looking for. If you just go to eBay and type in vintage chisel, you are going to get a lot of results. So before we just dive in, let's get our footing. One thing that you're going to see a lot of are Japanese chisels. These are also called nomi, and they are outstanding. Probably some of the best chisels made and widely available on eBay at good prices. A couple of things to watch out for. These have very difficult handles. They're complicated geometry, hard to replace, so I don't recommend buying these if the handles are damaged or missing. They also have a pretty different geometry than you're used to. You'll notice the back of the chisel looks very different. You need to learn a little bit about that. You probably want water stones. These are also pretty much only available in metric sizes. That may or may not be a problem for you. If it's not, Japanese chisels are a very legitimate choice. Another thing you're going to find are these butt chisels. That's actually what they're called. They're very short and much more of a carpentry chisel. These are for like mortising for a door when you're hanging it and you need to get into a tight space. This is a really useful chisel, but not so much for furniture making. I can't say I think you really need one. Then we have a lot of specialty chisels. Sometimes they sell for a lot of money because they're rare, but sometimes they're rare because they're not very useful. This, for instance, is a corner chisel. It's more of a timber framing tool. It's pretty obvious what it does. It gets into the corner of that mortise, and you know, they're just not as important as you might think. You can square up a mortise just with a regular chisel. These are difficult to use, difficult to sharpen. This one is too big for furniture work. I've never even bothered restoring it, and I don't know if I ever will. I bought it when I just didn't know very much about chisels. You're also going to find a lot of paring chisels, and that word gets thrown around a lot. It can be very ambiguous. In this case, when I say paring chisel, I mean something that's very, very long and slender like this. It's specifically meant for sliding across the wood or down into something and doing light-duty work. These are great tools, but they're not made for general bench work, and it's not very difficult to damage them. So here, for instance, is a valuable old paring chisel made by T.H. Witherby. It's a really well-known maker, and you can see that this one actually got bent because somebody tried to use it probably to chop a mortise or to do some sturdier work, and they just torqued that socket really badly. It's fixable, but it demonstrates how long paring chisels aren't going to do you for general bench jobs. They're a specialty tool. My next two chisels here are mortise chisels, and of course, mortise chisels are very useful. You can see they have an extremely robust design, they've got straight edges, they come in and out of the wood without binding up, and you can really wail on them with your mallet. Obviously, if you're doing a lot of mortises, these are very useful to have even for furniture making. The only thing about these is when you're first starting out, it's very difficult to know which sizes you need and what features you're looking for. A lot of people buy a whole set of mortise chisels, which most companies shouldn't even offer that, because most craftsmen who are making furniture, they only need 1 or 2 sizes. So don't go crazy with mortise chisels right away. Probably don't buy any mortise chisels right away. Figure out what you're making, what size mortise you're making, and then buy maybe 1, 2, maybe 3 mortise chisels, tops. That's all I ever use. And then these last 3 are a style that doesn't get discussed all that often. These are called firmer chisels. And firmer is actually the word former. That's how it changed over time. Former meaning that these chisels were used for forming, for shaping the work. What's useful about these is that they're just very robust, but they're not as heavy and clunky as mortise chisels. They're still flat, they're still relatively slender, but they have straight sides instead of having beveled edges like the modern bevel edge chisel. Some people don't see these as being useful, but they're really, really useful because they can do heavy work and they can do light work. They're pretty versatile at the bench. The only problem is these flat sides make them not so great for getting into tight spaces and doing paring work. So if you need to trim a dovetail, if you need to trim a rabbet, any place where the angle is going to be less than 90 degrees, these aren't going to be perfect for getting in there. And there, what you're going to need is a bevel edge chisel. That's the style that's really come to dominate. By the time we get to the golden age of factory-produced tools, chisels have evolved into this design here, which is sort of a multi-purpose bevel edge design. You can see that one of these combines a lot of the elements of other chisels that we've looked at. They have a lot of steel, especially concentrated right here where you'd find a weak point, and they're quite thick right at the top of the blade. They're not very long, which also helps them to be strong, but they're still in that bevel edge design. So we have flat, relatively delicate bevels that go almost all the way to the edge. A chisel like this is really great because it's so multi-purpose. You can cut and form work with it, you can chop away waste, you can get in between dovetails and do trimming, and you can even chop mortises with these. A carpenter or a furniture maker who had a set of these might also have a mortise chisel, but maybe not, because these chisels would probably do everything. Now I have 2 different styles of construction here. This smallest one is called a tang chisel. Here's a tang chisel without the handle, and you can see that it actually just has a little metal tang that goes up into the wooden handle. This thick swelling part right here, this is called the bolster. That keeps the handle from going too far down and splitting, and then it also has this metal ring right here. This is called a ferrule, and that also helps to keep the handle from splitting. Now, the tang construction is an excellent way of making a chisel. I like them a lot, especially for these smaller sizes, like 1/2 and 1/4 inch, because these are very lightweight, very easy to maneuver, and I don't hit them very often, so they don't need to be ultra strong. Now, for the larger sizes, 3/4, 1 inch, and this is 1 1/4 inch, I really like these to be socket construction. There's just a lot more steel in the chisel, and the way they're put together is really clever. This top part here is literally a socket. You can take this out, and you can see there's just an open socket at the end here, and then the handle is cone-shaped, and it's made to fit in there. You tap it on the bench, and that's enough to create a friction fit. As you hit these chisels for chopping waste or chopping out a mortise, you're actually just continually driving that handle more and more deeply into the socket, and that makes for a very robust design that almost never splits. You can see that I've got a little gap in the top of each of these. That's to give space for that handle to keep compressing as it gets driven further and further into that socket. It doesn't bottom out, and that keeps these handles from wanting to fall out. I don't know if it shows up on camera, but again, same size chisel, but this one is a lot thicker. There's just more steel. It's also a more thoughtful design. These Narex chisels feel great when you first start using them. These big handles are very comfy, but once you use something like this, these actually start to seem sort of clunky by comparison. This design is actually much more ergonomic. Now, the reason these chisels are so popular is that they're really versatile, really durable, and just so ergonomic. So when I pick one of these up, it's a substantial tool, but it feels strangely weightless in my hand. It's so well balanced, and the length of the blade is really just perfect. When you have a good handle on them, they sit really nicely in your hand, and you can direct the tip anywhere you want. very easily. These also have a low center of gravity, so when I go to chop with them, I can grip them like this, put them against the bench, it takes really no effort, and then I can feel when they're plumb really easily by just rocking them back and forth, and I can tell that is dead straight up and down. I can come along with my mallet and give that a tap, and I'm going to get a really nice cut into my work. Now, there is one downside with socket-style chisels, is that sometimes these handles do come out. Actually, they come out a lot of the time. We'll talk about that later. And sometimes they fall into the hands of craftspeople who are either too lazy or too stupid, I guess, to make another handle. What happens then is you get a socket like this one, where the craftsman has just taken a hammer and beaten directly on the socket. This is actually a rare and very valuable T.H. Witherby chisel. This would be worth a lot of money, except the socket is totally smoked, it's probably not fixable, and it's hardly worth anything. When I get to eBay, I'm going to search the category collectible tools, hardware, and locks, and I'm going to search for vintage socket chisels. I'm going to filter my results for auctions only, because the buy it now prices are much, much higher, like 10 or 20 times higher. And if you bid on a single chisel, very often there's only going to be one bid, and that person's going to win. So a little bit of patience is really going to pay off here. Now, for the examples I'm showing here, I filtered my results for completed listings. These auctions are over, so the prices I'm giving you are the prices these tools actually sold for. Here's a good example of what I found. This Craftsman socket chisel is in very clean condition. The machining is fairly crisp, there's no rust, and there's just a small amount of damage around the edges. That's easy to fix. It also appears to have a handle that actually fits, and that's a huge bonus because making and fitting these handles takes time. Winning bid? $2.50, with $6 shipping. That is a screaming deal. Here's another one. This is a similar chisel in the very useful 1-inch size. It has most of the same features as the Craftsman and excellent condition overall. That handle looks particularly good. I bet that it's original and it's a good fit. The maker is Worth, a brand I've never even heard of, but I would be totally willing to take a chance. Especially for a winning bid of $4 with $5 shipping. But wait, here's my absolute favorite. 2 good-looking tang chisels and 5 socket chisels, some of which need some restoration, but all generally good-looking. Winning bid? $1.50 with $8 shipping. I don't even need any chisels, and I feel bad that I missed out on this auction. That's how good it is. But there are a few things you need to look out for. Sometimes you'll find a Stanley 750 chisel, and the price will be insane. The seller will be getting $70 or $80 for a single chisel. This is because the 750 is a cult favorite. They were excellent chisels, and a lot of the ones we're looking at today are blatant knockoffs of the 750. Also, companies like Lee Nielsen copied the 750 to make their ultra-expensive socket chisel sets. Personally, I don't think the price is justified for regular old furniture making. So, if you find a stoutly constructed old socket chisel with no obvious damage, a good socket, good length, and clean machining lines, especially here along the bevels, you're probably going to have a winner. Now, another thing I've noticed about old chisels is the best ones tend to have a black or a dark gray patina on the steel. I assume this is a side effect of the heat treat. Stanley, for instance, was famous for heat treating the entire chisel, so you could sharpen it all the way up to the nub and you'd still have a good blade. Cheaper brands tend to have kind of a silvery, sort of flaky look, even when they're corroded. It's almost like they're plated, but they're not plated. They're just using a different steel, not as good. These ones that have the darker patina, these are the ones that usually are really hard and hold an edge super well. Now, just like with every other aspect of tool collecting, you have to watch out for the collectors. In addition to tools like the 750, the cork sniffers are going to totally jack up prices on anything that says T.H. Witherby, James Swan, and I.J. White. I own chisels by all of these makers, and you know what? They're chisels. I mean, they're good, they're very good, but they're not noticeably better than most of the other stuff I have kicking around my shop, especially decent-looking vintage chisels. Now, if you'd like brands that are a little bit more affordable, but still high quality, I recommend Greenlee, Fulton, Union, Lakeside, Buck, and Pexto. These are well-known names. They were well-known when they were still in business, and they're still a good bet now when you're buying their tools 50 or 75 years later. So I found a chisel I wanted to bid on, I won it for a couple of dollars, waited for it to come in the mail, now we're ready for the restoration. Let's have a look. Right away we can see this chisel is in good overall condition. It's got some rust, but everything is straight, the socket is in good condition. The bevel is pretty chipped and messed up. That's going to take a lot of work. And then the edge of the socket does have some damage and mushrooming. Somebody definitely pounded on this thing without a handle a little bit. But this is still going to be a pretty easy restoration. First thing is rust removal. I like to use the wire wheel because it's very quick, but you could also do this with sandpaper or steel wool. As soon as I start getting the rust off, we're revealing that black patina that I like to see. That suggests this is going to be a good hard steel. Now when I take the rust off the socket, it's much brighter, and that tells me it's probably not heat treated. It's more flexible, and that's good. It's going to stand up to the beating of a mallet. You can also see the company Pexto stamped their name in there nice and clearly. It's always a good sign when a company is taking credit for their tools. Now I'm going to move over to the grinding wheel. My biggest concern with this chisel is the bevel is in bad shape and it's also badly out of square. So I'm going to take the chisel and I'm going to grind straight on. That reduces heat buildup and it squares that edge up really quickly. Then my platform is always set to 25 degrees and I'm just going to slide that chisel up the platform until it makes contact with the wheel, and then gently start working the chisel against that wheel. Now, there's always a danger of overheating with a high-speed dry grinder like these, so I'm always going to be cooling it down in water, and my thumb position is really crucial here. I keep my thumb right up next to the edge of the chisel, and as soon as I feel that metal start to get warm, I take it off the stone and cool it down in the water. I'm going to grind this bevel almost to the edge because that's really going to cut down on honing time. The last thing I need to do with the grinder is address the outside of the socket. I have a little bit of a lip from where this thing was pounded on, and I can just rotate the exterior of that socket against the wheel. That takes off the extra metal really quickly. Now, over at the bench, I'm going to start tuning this thing up. The first problem is the back of the chisel is badly out of flat and has a lot of corrosion and a little bit of pitting. I'm going to start with medium grade sandpaper on glass and then move over to my stones. I'll go all the way through the stones to get that back flat and highly polished, and it doesn't need to be absolutely perfect. There can be a couple of tiny pits in there and the chisel will still perform just fine. Then I'm going to go through my standard freehand honing. I made a whole video about this a couple of weeks ago. You can check that out to see my full technique and to look at all the different stones that I use. The last little detail here is getting rid of the mushrooming I have inside the socket. If you pound on that socket without a handle, you're going to get deformation on the outside and the inside. I'm just taking a round file in here and taking that lip off. I have to go around several times, but it's really easy to tell when you've done it right. You can just stick your picky finger in there and move it around, and you'll feel if there's any lip that still needs to be taken off. Now, I always purchase a couple of pre-made handles on eBay and keep these around. They're usually pretty good quality and they save me a lot of time making handles from scratch. I have an old video that shows you all about how you can fit one of these up very quickly on the lathe. I've done that off camera here, and you can see that this handle is fitted really nicely into that socket. I can set it by pounding it against the bench. That fits it really tightly, and if I just tap it against the bench a little bit, it comes out. Problem with socket chisels is that chisel handle also comes out just because of changes in humidity and stuff like that. So I add a couple of drops of super glue before I set the handle, and then they never let go. A lot of people don't like this technique, but you can get that super glue to let go just by heating up the socket a little bit with a cigarette lighter. And no, the heat from a cigarette lighter is not going to mess up the temper of your chisel. I promise. And now we're ready to test this thing out. Here we go on a nice piece of cherry. You can see that I'm cutting through it effortlessly, no mallet, just hand pressure, and this is hardwood, not pine. The chisel cuts beautifully. It is ready for a long life in the shop. So I timed it. That entire restoration took me just over half an hour, and I only spent a couple of dollars, waited a week for the chisel to come in the mail. You only need 4 or 5 chisels to handle most of your work, so you could spend a small amount of money on eBay, an afternoon in the shop fixing them up, and then you'll have lifetime tools that you probably won't ever have to worry about again. And you know, this whole video idea came up because of a discussion on my Patreon discussion forum. We got into a really interesting conversation about what are reasonable prices to pay on eBay for vintage tools, specifically vintage hand planes, and people had very different opinions. Some people wanted to pay 10 or 15 bucks, some people wanted to pay 50 or $100. It was interesting sorting through it, and it really gave me the idea, you know, I need to address some of this stuff. I need to give people tips for how to buy tools online, because I buy a lot of tools online, especially since I can't get out to flea markets and garage sales. I would love to do more videos like this, and you should tell me down in the comments if you want to see them. What kinds of tools do you want to buy, vintage, online, and what kind of tips do you need? I have a bunch of videos about restoring and fixing up old tools. I will link to all of those down in the description. And you might be interested in being one of the people who makes these videos happen, one of the people who gives me the ideas for making these videos. Well, those are my patrons on Patreon. And you can check that out at patreon.com/RexKruger, where you'll find a complete list of all the rewards and benefits I give to the people who make this happen. And I'm always very grateful just to have viewers to my videos. So thanks for watching.